Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady. So unfortunately, this video is not going to be a full, in-depth, comprehensive review like I generally do. And that is because I'm here at Porsche of downtown LA and the car sold in the middle of me filming it. So fair warning, I will not be sharing my thoughts on the driving dynamics, but I do think that there is still some value here because I was able to spend some time in the Trackhawk, and I share my thoughts on the overall interior, the exterior, the trunk space, the overall performance figures. So if you're somebody who's looking to buy a Trackhawk and drive it on a daily basis, there will be some value here. I answer questions like, how comfortable is the interior? Can my kids sit in the back seat? How many charging ports are there? How big is the trunk? So if you happen to decide to stick around, thank you for doing so, and I hope you enjoy this video. See you later. So let's get started with the review by giving a big thank you to Porsche of downtown LA for giving me access to this Trackhawk today. If you happen to be interested in this car or any other new or pre-owned Porsche product, send me a DM on Instagram and I'll make sure you get taken care of. Now let's get started with the Trackhawk and covering the cargo or the trunk space. So there's multiple ways of opening the trunk. There's a button on the interior, there's a button on the key, and then there's also comfort access right here underneath the license plate. Generally it's on top of the license plate, but here it's underneath. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and talk about the cargo space. So there's 36.3 cubic feet of space in this 700 horsepower SUV. Now you have the ability to easily stack 2 or 3 larger pieces of traveling equipment with you. Depending on how clever you want to get with racking and stacking, you can probably fit much more in here. In addition to that, you have the ability to fold down the rear seats, and they fold down completely flat, which is always great. And that expands you to almost 65 cubic feet of space in the back of your Trackhawk. Now, a couple of things I noticed about the trunk, there are several hangers in here. I would assume these are for grocery bags to make sure they don't move around when you're driving around quickly in your Trackhawk. And secondly, there is a 12-volt outlet for easy access to an electronic source. For example, if you're out camping and you needed this 12-volt outlet for electricity. Now, beyond that, the trunk is electronic closing. So you push this button here on the side and it will beep a couple times and close for you. Now let's move to the front of the car and I will tell you about the performance figures in this Trackhawk. So the most notable item of the Trackhawk is of course its engine, the Hellcat motor, and it's a 6.2 liter supercharged V8 making 707 horsepower and 645 pounds-feet of torque. It's made it to an 8-speed automatic transmission and it's putting power down to all 4 wheels. Now what does all of this equate to? A 0 to 60 time of 3.5 seconds, which was earth-shattering when this car came out. Now this thing isn't all about straight line speed, so if you wanted to convince someone that this has other uses, you can tow up to 7,200 pounds in your 707 horsepower Trackhawk. Now, as far as its suspension goes, it does have a 5-mode Bilstein adaptive damper system. In track mode, it could send up to 70% of the power to the rear wheels. Otherwise, it runs in 40 to 60 front to rear bias. It also has an electronic limited slip differential, and equally as important for a 700 plus horsepower car are its brakes. Almost 16-inch rotors on the front of this Trackhawk with 6-piston brake calipers, and in the rear 4 pistons. Wrapping those brakes are 20 by 10-inch wheels on all 4 corners with a 295 section tire. Now going back to when the Trackhawk was released, it was the quickest and most powerful SUV ever made. Now this was in 2018 and it no longer carries the reins of those 2 categories, now belonging to the Tesla Model X Plaid. It's quite interesting that an electric car is now the quickest and most powerful SUV. But nonetheless, one thing that the Tesla Model S or Model X Plaid cannot do is make exhaust noise. So let's go around back and take a listen to what this Trackhawk sounds like. All right, so now the interior of the Trackhawk, and let's start off with the quality and the design topic. As far as quality goes, I think it's decent in here. There are some nice things like the materials used throughout the interior. For example, the carbon fiber is actually a really nice touch on the doors and on the dash here. There's some nice leather and Alcantara sway mixture on the seats. The steering wheel is a nice leather. The shifter has some nice leather on it. But then you look at some other aspects of the car, like this lower part of the dash, it's literally all plastic. The upper part of the dash is mostly hard. The leather doesn't look that fine and expensive. So given that this Trackhawk is rather expensive, sticker price roughly $100,000, and even in the used car market, these are trading hands for in the $80,000 to $90,000 range, depending, of course, mileage and all those other variables. But nonetheless, quality is okay, I'll call it that. Now, as far as its design goes, this thing was probably pen and penciled over a decade ago, so the design is looking rather dated. And the first thing that you'll notice to contribute to that is the fact that there's so many buttons and knobs in here. But nonetheless, the nice thing about buttons and knobs is that they're simple to use and you'll never get confused about what does what. So that's a nice thing about it. Now, as far as the size and the comfort of this interior, as far as size goes, this is a mid-size SUV, and of course it is a Grand Cherokee underneath that Trackhawk badge. So there's plenty of room in here. I'm 5'11" and I do have headroom up on top of me. I sit in a nice command style position in this car. As far as the seat comfort goes, it is very, very comfortable, nice and cushiony. The one thing about it is not aggressive. It's not the best supporting laterally, and it's the same complaint I had when I was driving the other Hellcat versions of FCA products. But it does have heated and ventilated seats on the front, and in the back you've got heated seats. I'll cover the back here separately in just a minute. Now, the infotainment system and the overall technology in here, in front of you, you do have a little LCD screen that reads out several pieces of information, and flanking them are analog gauges. So if you're an analog gauge type of person, you're gonna like the Trackhawk. The speedometer, interestingly, goes up to 200 miles an hour, even though this car is not capable of going that fast. I believe it tops out at about 180 miles per hour, which is still nothing to scoff at in a 5,300-pound SUV. But nonetheless, moving on over into the interior, this is the Dodge, I believe it's called Uconnect infotainment system. It's running on a 8.4-inch screen. It's just a square screen, and it's hard to imagine that a 8.4-inch screen is kind of looking dated and small nowadays, with 10 and 11 and 12-inch screens in certain BMWs. And of course, in the Tesla, you've got that huge 17-inch screen, or is it 17 or 19? Nonetheless, humongous screens, almost double the size of this screen. But the infotainment system itself, the software, it's very intuitive and it's very simple to use. This is the strong suit of this infotainment system. Otherwise, the graphics aren't looking as crisp and as sharp as some of the other manufacturers that I've experienced with the latest infotainment system, but it will do what it's intended to do, and that is provide functional use, the technology aspect, listen to the radio, plug in a navigation location, do all of these things. It does that just fine. Now, as far as charging goes, there's several charging ports in the front area here. So 2 USB type A's and 2 12-volt outlets. So you can have 4 people or 4 connected devices charging in the front of your Trackhawk. So that's always a big plus. I read that the Trackhawk does have the option of coming with a panoramic roof, but this car does not have it. So if you're that type of person, it's always nice to have the open air feeling inside of a cabin, whether SUV or car. Now let's move on to the rear seats, and I'll talk to you about what it's like over there. All right, so now the back seats of the Trackhawk, and let's start off with the overall size or the space. So I'm 5'11", I'm sitting behind myself, and you can see I have plenty of leg room here. As far as headroom goes, I do have a couple inches on top of me, so somebody a little bit taller than I am will fit in here just fine. My overall seating position is good. The seat cushioning is very, very comfortable, just as comfortable as the seats in the front, and the leather and Alcantara mixture continue on in the back seats. So nice to see that there. You do have some carbon fiber in the back seats as well. One other nice thing about the seating position is that these back seats have a significant amount of recline in them. Check this out, all the way back here. It's almost like a lounging seat. Of course, it's a little bit uncomfortable considering if this area here is not reclined as well. But you do have a really nice sofa style, lazy boy style seat that you can recline. That's always nice to have. Now, some of the amenities back here, as I mentioned, you do have heated seats and they're controlled using these switches. And as far as charging goes, wonderful back here as well. So you do have two USB type A outlets and a 115 volt home plug-in style charger. Now this is wonderful because you have the ability to plug in your charging head that you would use at home, or for example your laptop charger. So this is a great underrated feature that Jeep has included in the back of the Trackhawk, or essentially the Grand Cherokee. Otherwise, one thing I'm going to ding it for is it doesn't have a third zone climate control back here, so your backseat passengers cannot control the climate here, even though they have their own little vents to change the direction in which the fan is blowing. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. It's a functional back seat. I would say it's a nice space, and it does have decent amenities as far as the charging, the heated seats, and that 115 volt plug-in style outlet is always pretty nice to have as well. So that's out of the way. Now let's go ahead to the driving portion of the review and see what this Trackhawk feels like behind the wheel.